A blessed day to you. My name is Nigel Daring. I'm the originator of the philosophy of Darinism or Darinism. It's a philosophy based on my analysis of Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3, um, which I correlate to my analysis of existence. And in doing that, I show how Genesis 1, 2, and 3 has validity. I've done 15 previous videos. I hope you'll check those out before you come to this one. And also, if you want to check out my book, Existence, God, Man, Society, and Nature, you can check it out on you can get it from www.amazon.com. You can just type in the name of the book, or you can type in my name, Nigel Daring, and you'll see 16 books come up, inclusive of that particular one. Um, so today what I want to do is some clarifications based on the discussions that I've had before, and also, and before I go on, I'll do some review. So last time I looked at God and creation, relationship between God and creation. I I, I considered the nature of God, right? So we said God exists as a consciousness that's in the nothingness. Even before physical realm, God is this consciousness that's there. That means he exists as an ego, right? A conceptual being, able to process ideas, generate ideas, receive ideas. And he also has a body, which we call the tree of life. And it's a tree that just generates life for all existence and all creation, all nature, from the spiritual to the physical realm, needs to sustain itself off the body of God. Even God himself feeds off his own body. So, and this is an eternal cycle where his body is generating what it is he needs for life, and 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 he is his body, so he's basically replenishing his body off of what his body is regenerating. And so he needs nothing but himself to survive. He has no parent, um, no one before him. He is forever, infinite, eternal. um, then we discuss and make the argument that God is good as well as evil, heaven as well as hell. In the sense that, just to be clear, God is operating from a standpoint of good. He is good, he is absolute good. But evil must exist even as an existential reality. In the pure, if there were no other beings except God, and God is just there as this being, evil, he has to understand evil even as an existential reality, because that's the only way good will have meaning, right? Because without evil as a possibility, then it becomes good by rote, in some mechanical behavioral way. So then he cannot be conscious, right? you know Conscious beings have to be able to conceive of something outside of the order of nature, of their being, right? Or of the order of existence. So consciousness, it's evil and the presence of evil that gives consciousness its very meaning. Without evil as a possibility, then consciousness itself cannot have meaning. What you have is behavioral mechanical existence. But that's not what we have in reality. In reality, there is such a thing as consciousness. God is heaven as well as hell. In order to appreciate heaven as a reality, there must be this concept of hell. If you're going to understand God as a kingdom, as in the infinite realm of of his existence, then there has to be the concept that there is an existence outside his kingdom, right? If there's the idea that one can feed off the tree of life and must feed off the tree of life, then there must exist the concept that one cannot, one does not necessarily have to feed off the tree of life and exist in some reality devoid of that, and God has to know that. If He is to be God, He has to be aware of it, and His presence has to percolate somehow in that notion of the emptiness. So He has to be Himself in His kingdom per se, in the fulfillment of who He is, but He has to be aware of what's out, that there's of an outside of His being, right? So no, we also said so we need consciousness. Good must exist, and good and evil must exist in order for consciousness to exist, for that to become real. Because consciousness, when in the state of consciousness, with you get choices by having good and evil as a reality. You're not right. You're not functioning in some mechanical, perfunctory way. Now, if you notice in the Adam and Eve story, the whole order which was created was good. God created it good, and everything that He made man good. But in order for man not to be functioning in some mechanical way in the order that He made, basically to just do what He says and and function just instinctively by His commands, He has to awaken their consciousness by this other possibility of evil. That's why the devil is introduced. That evil could become a reality, and they have to. It is their choice. They have to be able to awaken their consciousness then, so that their consciousness becomes alive and they're not functioning mechanically. They have to be aware of the possibility of evil, that they can have this choice. Now, God, it is introduced, but what God recommends is for them to operate from the standpoint of good as He does. Because He's aware of evil, but He's not up, and evil is within His presence, but in terms of His operation, He's operating from the standpoint of good. And so this is what He's recommending to the creatures that He's created, that they operate from the standpoint of good and not be evil. Evil has to be introduced to awaken their consciousness, but it is and present to them choices, but it is incumbent upon them to choose good. They didn't, and their choice of evil brought about the fall. Now, we also said God created beings in their consciousness to reflect some facet of Him, some aspect of Him. So God is everything, and he has all the talent. He's the fulfillment of Himself, and he's a totality of being with all gifts, all abilities and talents. But in creating conscious beings, he creates each person as some facet of himself, right? So he relegates to in the nature of man, right, and spiritual beings, some talent, some given talent, or a set of talents, a particular set of talents, not all of his talents, but some particular set of gifts, or a gift or talent, whereby each spiritual conscious being gets to represent him. And remember, we're also spiritual beings, so each being gets to represent who God is in some dimension of self. All right. Then we said also um, there are also beings that are solely behavioral in existence, in creation. For example, the tree of life itself is a solely behavioral entity, right? It doesn't have consciousness, but it's God's body. Um, we said nature itself is behavioral. The animals, the plants, the stars, the galaxies, these are behavioral beings. They don't have consciousness. Um, but spiritual beings like God, spiritual beings with consciousness, also have a behavioral, emotional dimension like God also, and and that describes human beings. That describes us. We also have a behavioral, emotional component in spirit at a spiritual level. We also have it in our animal bodies. Our bodies function behaviorally. The heart beats, right? We have smooth muscles that are involuntary muscles, right? Um, so there's a behavioral aspect to our existence also. Now, in terms of identity, we said each person is given a nature in reflection of God, and then what evil becomes is this concept of not operating according to your nature. You're stepping outside of who you are to try to be somebody else, and that was the original sin of Adam, and it basically sets the tone for what for sin and human evil going forward. It's sin that occurs even in the spiritual realm where you have these devils in spirit that they don't accept the nature God gave them, and they sin against him. They're trying to be their own God. So evil is basically looking at your nature when you're whatever nature you have, and you're scorning it to become some other nature. So whatever God made you to be, you're choosing to become some other being. You're choosing to become your own God, to conceive of yourself in your own way. All right. So that's our review for today. Let's move on. Now, in I sort of alluded to this in the discussions prior, um, that that Adam and Eve, it provides us some convenience in terms of discussing human nature, because eventually we want to discuss human society and why we form the sort of societies we form. In order to understand human society, you have to understand human nature, because it's human beings that are forming human society. Um, so we use Adam and Eve to flesh out human nature and human reality, human existence, but we also use them to sort of understand sort of prime our discussion that's going to come for human society, understanding them in a state of innocence versus a state of sin. And so in a Adam, I sort of alluded to Adam and to how I'm going to use Adam and Eve prior to their sin. I'm sort of going to use that concept to represent primitive cultures. There's that state that they're in to represent primitive indigenous cultures in living in a state of nature, small societies um, that live in sort of live in nature. Um, and then I'm going to use Adam and Eve after they sinned, and engaging their sin to represent civilized existence, where these massive enterprises that are developing with rank order societies, um, these concrete structures that are being built, or these societies that are intent on regulating their own sense of self, own sense of identity, separate and apart from nature. So Adam and Eve, before they sinned, so sort of convenient for me to discuss man in a state of nature before, in primitive society, and then Adam and Eve after when they sinned, and to use their state that they were entering to discuss civilized existence. Now that's not exactly accurate or correct, um, because the distinction isn't that dramatic, but it's really sort of a continuum from primitive societies. And when I use primitive, I don't mean it in the derogatory, but from primitive societies to civilization, I view this as a continuum. Um, why is that? Um, the truth is, from the very outset, the first people that came upon the earth, they sinned. They were the ones that sinned. And because of they sinned, that means that all other cultures that came out of them, right, were born from them and spread out on earth, they inherited that sin. So the sin was a part of them. Now, you notice that for most of man's history, these cultures were living in nature, and so so the sin that was there, that Adam introduced to them, it's there in their cultures at some level, and even though they're experiencing nature, and sort of living in nature, there isn't a perfection in their cultures and in their societies, because the sin was derived from Adam, was there amongst them, within them, right? Because remember, when parents pass on their psychologies, their mentalities to their children, so whatever mentalities and psychologies Adam and Eve developed, they pass it on to their progeny, which pass it on to their progeny, and so forth and so on. So it isn't like um, the cultures that we've studied or known about, or or those primitive cultures that have existed prior to serious, massive civilized existence, that they were somehow pure and represent a state of sinlessness or purity, of moral perfection before civilized existence. It's not that at all. All right, so it's not quite accurate. And then after, you know, within after Adam and Eve sinned, and we're going to use later on to discuss the state that they emerge as sort of representative of civilized existence. That's not even actually true, because after they sinned, what happened was there was the introduction of the idea, right, of this concept that the physical realm is real, their material, their physical life is life itself. That's all they are, right? And so that idea was introduced, and they didn't massively engage farming enterprises, and engage the land in terms of digging it up and developing massive civilized structures. But what I am going to do is use at the Genesis story, between distinguish between Genesis chapters 1 and 2, when they were living in a state of perfection, from Genesis chapter 3, when they after they sinned, and just to compare and contrast, just for as a matter of convenience, these two realities, of massive civilized existence versus simple societies that live in order, live in nature, and live in tune, that sort of live more in tune with nature, not absolutely in tune with nature, because there is the sin that they have that sort of remove them from nature, but more in tune with nature. So um, it serves as a convenient, as a matter of convenience, for me to distinguish between Adam and Eve before they sinned and Adam and Eve after they sinned, as representing primitive societies versus civilized societies. But in truth, the sin was introduced, and the primitive societies that have all existed on earth have been contaminated, and it is there, and it is the sin that was within them that was capitalized on, that ended up degenerating these societies to become civilized societies. Where you get this breakdown in society, and they're embarking on a new mode of existence, or massively embarking on it. All right. So that's that there. Let's move on. Now, the other thing that I wanted to point out, in terms of the Genesis story, it is both a metaphor and an actual series of events. Um, it's speaking in terms of meaning, and it's the meaning that's important, right? And so at some points when God is being referenced, he's, you know, it's not pointing it out specifically, but God is communicating with them in spirit. And another point that he's being referenced, he's communicating to them as a physical presence. What it means is that when they first appeared upon the earth, when man first appeared upon earth, God did come to them also in a physical form, and they recognized them, right? And they recognize that this is God who's there with them, talking to them. Now, now, at where you're seeing God speak to them in spirit, um, is where is showing them basically the tree of life versus the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's that because they exist in spirit, so he's communicating with them in spirit. And so they're perceiving these um, realities. They're perceiving a spiritual reality. They're perceiving a physical reality because God had wrapped them up in flesh. Um, so he's communicating with them in that mode of spirit, but also there is a point where he's actually communicating with them in flesh also in a physical form where he materializes himself. And because there's a point where it says after they sinned, he gave them coats of skin. That means what happened to them inside inside them, what happened to them internally. When he walked up to them, he realized that they're ashamed of themselves. Right? They want to put on clothes, and he knows that really what happened is that internally they've disrespected him, and they've disrespected order, and they're living in a state of insecurity. And so when he gave them coats of skin, that means he's in some physical form taking, giving them these coats of skin from the animals, then basically. So God is with them in spirit, talking to them in spirit as he does in flesh. And it's the same sort of thing if we think of man's concept of God upon earth in let's say even the Christian dogma that God came upon flesh as this being Yahshua or Jesus, and he's talking to mankind in flesh, and he's instructing them in flesh. But by him being in flesh, isn't that doesn't mean that he's not existing in spirit also, right? So he's talking to them in spirit, and he's as well as he's in body, telling them, instructing them and giving them um, clues as to proper moral, or giving them ideas and instructing them as to proper moral behavior. Now, I want to point out this thing with morality and nature. All right. Now, just to be clear, man at peace, when man is at peace with himself, he is a moral creature. All right. In a state of immorality, he is not at peace. Right. He's in a state of sin, and he's not at peace. So basically, if you feel yourself like you're compelled to sin or in a state of evil, you're not at peace with yourself. Right. So man at peace with himself is a moral creature. And being at peace with himself, he fits creation. He's not only a moral creature, but moral man fits nature. He fits the order of nature. Now, there's this other aspect to it that nature is alive, and nature welcomes him in. So as long as he's moral, then nature welcomes him as a moral being, because nature itself, as I pointed out before, nature is God. It manifests God. It embodies his personality, his spirit. So if you're a moral being, then God will welcome you into his kingdom spiritually as well as physically. Nature is nature. Nature is his, welcomes man in. So nature itself is a moral force. Nature is moral. Now notice when man sins, man dropped and man becomes an immoral creature. He doesn't fit nature. He's antagonistic to nature. So God, if you notice what God said when man sinned, he said, "Cursed is the ground for thy sake, in sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life, thorns and thistles shall it bring forth to thee." Right? That means nature becomes antagonistic to man in a state of sin. If man is not obeying God, nature is going to be against him. Nature is revolted by man in a state of sin. And so then man has to engage in an agonized existence having to deal with nature. So now I had pointed out that before that when man sinned, he actually has to now wrestle with nature to get his food out of ego and out of fear, right? Out of just is out of his state of mind and his state of his emotional being, right? This the emotional deficiencies that he's developed in fear and the psychology of wanting to control and dominate nature. But guess what? He actually now has to wrestle with nature because nature is going to make life hard for him. Nature is going to resent him. Nature is going to bring thorns and thistles to him. So it's not just that because of his sin, that that he's now compelled by his psychology and his mentality to wrestle with nature. He must wrestle with nature in a state of sin because nature is responding to him reflexively as a moral force. It is going to make his life hard. Nature doesn't want to take care of him, basically, and be friendly with him because he's not being friendly with nature. He's not being a good partner, right? He's not being assuming his proper place, and nature resents that because fundamentally, deep within, it's God that resents that. It's God that resents man's disobedience and man's disrespect. So nature is gonna present um a certain agony to in his life. So the fear that he develops in a state of morality, he doesn't need to fear nature, right? But once he develops this ego, he develops this fear of nature, right? And in a sense, it's actually justified that he has to develop this fear of nature because in the state of immorality, nature isn't going to be a cooperative partner with him anymore. Nature isn't just going to respond to him and feed him well. Now, this is like a sort of a general thing that you'll notice throughout the Bible that when man sinned, when God uses the elements of nature to often bring destruction to man. When man doesn't listen to him, God uses nature against him. Right? It's like Jonah. God says to him, "Go east." Jonah said, "No, I don't want to do what it is that you're telling me to go. I don't want to go to Nineveh." Right? And I'm going to take a boat and go somewhere else. And and because of that, there's a response in terms of the disaster. The oceans got disrupted, right? And he got swallowed in a whale. And not until he was able to commit to doing what God said and go where he's supposed to go did the waters calm and the whale burp him out and he just went to do what is intended for him to do. It's a point for us that we should learn basically that nature itself is moral and we need it, while we're existing upon this planet and anywhere in existence in nature, it is incumbent upon us to be moral beings because nature responds to us, to our state of being. Okay, I apologize for that abrupt switch of slides. My computer does that, as I explained it in some previous videos. But anyway, it's important for us to realize that we need to be moral beings as individuals, as a society, collectively, because nature responds to morality. It doesn't. If you're living in a state of morality, nature doesn't want to hurt you. It doesn't want to harm you. but if it wants to care for you basically. But in a state of immorality, that's when the disasters will start coming your way, right? Nature does operate on that basis, that it does give provide disaster where there's immorality. All right, let's go to this slide proper. Um, Now, just for us to recognize in terms of the Adam and Eve story that the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Remember, God presented Adam and Eve with this choice between good and evil, basically between the tree of life or the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, what you must realize is that it takes a particular mindset to actually go for the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? They, 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 they couldn't, Adam and Eve couldn't just go for it out of some casual curiosity. Oh, why don't we just check this out and see what it's about? The only way that they were going to go for it is through inspired intention. Only they needed to, they were going to go for it based upon a deliberate um, move. They're based upon motivation. They were highly motivated to go after it. It's not just happens to be like, why don't we just try it out, right? You have to, there's a particular mindset that has to be developed for them to go after it. It takes a particular mindset for that they have to go after it. That's why when God saw them and said, "How did you know you're naked?" Basically, who told you you're naked? You touch, and then he further goes on to say, "You touched that tree," basically, because he knows that they had the mindset. For them to be insecure, they got the mindset, that evil mindset. He knows that they didn't touch it out of casual curiosity. They touched it out of that mindset that they wanted to become their own gods, that they were going to hate their own nature that he gave them and try to become something else. So when he saw them being ashamed, he knew that this was a particular mindset, because from the very first outset he said they were going to die, because he knew that there's a particular mindset that it takes to touch that tree, and that mindset causes death. So when he saw them and knew that they were in a state of death, which they themselves weren't acknowledging because their insecurity is death, he knew that there was that mindset. They had the mindset, and right, they developed that mindset that they were functioning in an unnatural state, in a state of evil. They were made to function from the state of good, but they developed the mindset for evil. That and what does that teach us? We don't just casually, uninspiredly do anything that's evil. We are in a certain frame of mind. And it's deliberate, and God will never look at not hold us accountable for our evil. We can never say to him basically, oh, we just casually just tried something, or do something evil, and never thought of it. We're responsible for our actions. Once we perform evil, we're inspired to it. Okay, so that ought to be pointed out. That there's intention, there's deliberate, inspired intention involved once evil is being committed. And Adam and Eve had that deliberate, inspired um, motivation to do what they did, not casual curiosity. It takes a particular mindset to sin. No, just before I close out, I just want to say, because I used two meanings of the tree of life in the book. One in the first in the earlier pages, I use it to represent, at one point, to represent genitalia. That the tree of life is their Adam and Eve's genitalia, and then later on I use it, the body of God. Um, let's just say we're going to settle on the body of God, because that's what the tree of life is really. Using it genitalia to represent it, I scored some points, I made some points in the book, but really the tree of life is the body of God that sustains all existence, and that is all it is. All right. All right. That we'll close out from here for today. Check out my other videos, of course. Subscribe to my channel for upcoming videos. Um, like, share my videos, and like them. And until next time, bye bye.